Both lights are on, so it's on already?
Yeah.
Okay. What, oh, there's my. That's good, man. All right. Hey, Kristen, thank you for joining us. I don't have I'm facing away from the screen, so if you have something to say, please just, okay, oh yeah, or just unmute yourself and talk. So thank you everybody for coming today. Let me just get into the document too. It's hard to believe, but a decade ago, we started our sustainability studies minor, and it's been very successful. And we've had questions along the years about, or over the years about creating a major. And, you know, long story short, I think it's time. I mean, I think we can. I've been advising the minor, I think for 8 years. Initially, Glenn Graham was the director. And I have to say, I do almost nothing in terms of promoting it. Like we have a flyer, I put it out on the, you know, sort of our member desks, tables at open houses, but we consistently have like 40 or 50 minors without doing any kind of outreach. So I think it actually would be fairly successful. I think it's going to be a popular program. So we have about a year ago, we met and with what I'll call the Sustainability Studies Minor Board. And when we met a year ago, we talked about the possibilities and what it would look like or what it should look like. And initially, it looked very similar to the minor, which has core courses and then 2 areas, one in science, one in society. Zach, can you grab the, yeah, one in science, one in society, and students have to take at least one upper division in each of those. What has tended to happen is that students are really focusing their electives in one of those tracks, like either the science and sustainability or in the society. And usually it's very aligned with their major, which doesn't really get the ideal of having an interdisciplinary program that we're developing. And so actually, I think it was Justin in geology who came up with the recommendation that we do more like tiers, the same way English does this, geology does it. So where students have, they have to take courses, almost like a Chinese menu, right? Like you have to take like certain from each of the areas. So John, would you mind just scrolling down a little bit? Okay, so we still have, we basically have 3 buckets or 3 tiers of what we're looking at for the major. One is scientific principles, and any notes that are in red there are problems. And I can go into the problems in detail if people are interested. But they're problems that we need to work out before it goes through governance. Can you scroll down just a little bit to the next? Yeah. So the social sustainability and equity, we're adding in actually a lot of courses there, many of which come from anthropology. We had a question about that, which I'll also get to in just a moment. But then the other big bucket, really the courses that we're missing for the major are the very practical kind of doing sustainability, right? So, John, I'm sorry, can you just scroll up to one, like, to, there you go. So we don't have to stick with this name. I've been willing to entertain feedback on it, but so we're really missing classes on data and sustainability. So we have Math 379. is rarely offered, although I heard from Nantha Kumar and he said it is actually probably going to be offered at least every fall. So that is good. And then we have a slew of new courses that I think a bunch of us are going to be teaching. And I would put out there that we're looking for other people to also help teach these classes, so that it doesn't always fall to the same people to teach all the time. But so for example, my GIS abilities are enough that I could teach like a 2-credit, very basic intro to geographic information systems. We wanted to add a class on project management, which I think John is going to teach, or at least be willing to kind of spearhead and create the course shell for. A class on database creation and management, and Alana has a lot of experience with that and is going to, that's okay, and is going to teach that. And then the last one is a class on carbon accounting, which Kate Spector is going to begin with. And so those 4 SUS courses, initially, the way we're envisioning it is that those would actually be quarter courses, so that you could do it over the course of a full semester. A student could take like project management and carbon accounting, or project management and database management. And then, so that you can kind of compress it more. And we I think also sort of in the works, we have the idea of a micro-credential for sustainability. All right, so I'm going to just back up a second and say, in a lot of ways, the sustainability field is like the Wild West, right? Like it has developed in the absence of any kind of credentialing. It's really come about because of need, and it looks very different in different places. So we have a very interdisciplinary program. I think partly because, and I want to make the case that people who are going into this field really do have to have like a very broad interdisciplinary understanding, because they're going to be asked to do a lot of different things. So I guess I'll stop there for now. Does anyone have questions or feedback? Alana?
So the quarter courses aren't paid, really. That's kind of an issue, because it's a lot to teach some of those classes.
So
plus students with the 2-credit thing, how's that going to intersect with their 120 credits? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they like the credentialing, I know, but I know we have students with like weird credit issues, they'll end up like with 121, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Is that something that governance is going to definitely ask us about that? I
mean, so governance, I think, would and should ask us about it. So initially, my idea was that these would be those courses would actually each be 1 credit, and you could take, and it would be a 5-week class. So over the course of a semester, you would have all 3, right? Like, or 3 of the 4. You can do project management, database creation, and GIS, or whatever of the 3. So that would make it like, in terms of students, like it's a 3-credit course and 5 weeks, you can do it that way. The challenge comes on our end of it, of how do you account for that time? And the 5-week thing, when I ran it by the dean and the provost, like, I think in theory, they were supportive of, like, they like this idea and the flexibility, but we don't have a structure to support it. So that's when we decided to change it to a quarter course. It could be a 3-credit quarter course, or it could be a 3-credit full semester course, but having it be 3 credits makes it easier for us than to teach it on load, right? Like it doesn't mess up our load hours, because then you might be short an hour if you teach a 2-credit, right? So it's, I don't know the best way to deal with that. I mean, this is actually one of the things I'm glad that we're talking about, because having a 3-credit class in a quarter puts you out of the calendar. Right, because then you need to have, so there are people who do it. There's always, not always, but often someone in modern languages will teach French 101 and French 102 as quarter courses. And it's an 80-minute class that meets 3 times a week. So, but because our Monday, Wednesday, Friday and our Tuesday, Thursday schedules are offset from each other, it means it doesn't fit so well in our structure. Like you would have to do it like,
You could do it hybrid.
right, or yeah, you can do it hybrid.
I would just set them up as hybrid, honestly.
Yeah, and you think it's better just to do a 3-credit course?
Yeah, because otherwise we're gonna get pressure and pushback on getting paid for them consistently, and nobody's gonna want to sign on to, like, database creation and management is by nature and it's an intensive course.
Right,
Because people actually have to do it and they have to learn the program. Right.
right. I
And
mean, the
GIS,
same is,
thing.
I was just gonna say, the same is true with GIS,
Right,
like,
so even an intro baby GIS course, right? Like even if you're not throwing them a ton of data that they have to manage, but just how do you set up a geodatabase? How do you build a map? How do you actually read data or input data, which is going to be the thing that they're going to want to do, right? That's a lot of time that students are definitely going to be spending the hours for 3 credits. And frankly, I think you are too. Teaching that
I know,
class.
I know.
So, I mean, I would set it up as hybrid, then you set it up on the Monday, Wednesday schedule or Tuesday, Thursday schedule like normal.
Right, with
And then
assignments,
With
specific
or an
assignments.
online thing, which makes sense anyway, that works well with the pedagogy, at least for database creation and GIS. I would imagine carbon accounting and stats too, but.
There's a growing number of comments in the chat.
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, research methods, well, yes. And thank you, Matt, for that comment. I mean, I kind of started this and then I dropped the ball on it a few years ago. I would actually really love for us to just create a social science research methods course that different departments would allow to count for their research methods, because we're different fields, but it's the same theory, right? They're the same, not theory, but the same issues of like reliability of information and validity, like even if you're pulling from different theories.
That's a goal that we have.
Yeah. So, yeah, actually, John, would you mind going up toward the top? So Kristen, I kind of skipped over what the core courses of the program are, which are, so the only course that we would have to add, well, aside from these new ones that we talked about, and on the data and sustainability. And when we'd originally talked about putting this major forward a year ago, we didn't have those really thought out yet. And I did actually check with Ramin. We can just create the major with 2 tiers. Adding a 3rd tier is not a big enough change, we think, to have to send it to Albany again, which is what I'm trying to avoid. So we could, if we don't have those things answered yet, we could hold off on those, but the foundations of sustainability already exists. Glenn Graham and I teach that offset, like I do 1 year, he does the next year, which is really good. And, you know, it's really, I think it's much easier for us to have interdisciplinary courses when they're not like in our home department. That you can take a semester off if you have to. We've got 3, this is a little bit of a change, but 3 other courses that could count as another requirement. Like basically, so foundations of sustainability are like the social science foundations. We do culture, politics, a little bit of psychology, you know, just like very basic economics. And then we would have either a capstone seminar or an internship or a project. So that I think Kristen maybe would get. The GST, I have no problem doing it. The challenge right now is if we have a GST course like the generic service learning one, we only need to be able to count it when it's a sustainability project. So we'd have to create like our own service learning if we wanted to add that. But yes, almost like doing like sort of an independent study, to Matt's point. Zach, did you have something to say earlier too? Do you have a question or?
I have lots of questions, but I'll let other people kind of talk. if there's other things to bring up, but yeah.
Well, if you want to just scroll down to the bottom, I'll bring up, so when I sent this out to all the faculty who are already involved in the program, I got a number of comments. Oh, so actually, yeah, I forgot about those. So we have some courses that have been taught that have not been taught in a very long time and aren't officially on the books, but I've heard from the faculty who teach them that they want to bring them back into the rotation. So those are the gender, women's studies, the sustainability. I forgot what Dave Sargent calls his, but it's like, we'll say sustainability and human development, a psychology one, and environmental ethics. Rob Card, I think, did teach that one semester. And I think he likes it. So I'm hoping we can get that offered on a regular basis. So like I'm creating kind of like an intro to GIS course. We do have other courses that are in existence. So Geo 326, but that's really for geo majors. There's actually a project management class in the School of Business, but it's only for business majors and minors. And it has a slew of prerequisites that are not really necessary for what we want to do. And we do actually have courses on this campus with the same name offered by different departments. So I don't think that would, yeah, I know it's not a great thing, but it exists. And then, okay, so just scroll down to the end and I'll just say the comments that I've gotten so far. So one comment, and this is from someone who's been involved from the beginning, is like, this is way too broad, right? Like there's just too much going on. And we're like watering it down too much by trying to make it appealing. And I don't discount the comment, right? Like when you look at sustainability type programs in other schools, they do tend to be very focused. Like Cortland has like energy, and it's really like energy, like physics and technology based. Binghamton has their sustainable communities that is a little bit more social science based. And so we are kind of broad. And so my comment, like specifically on the anthropology courses, was that each of those courses has a very strong ecological component, right? That looks at like how they lived, how they used resources, maybe why they failed, right? So the components are there, but it did bring up the question for me that maybe we should try to limit, like in global studies, students have to take within these concentrations, they have to take courses from at least 2 or 3 different departments. In global studies, it's 3. For us, it probably would be 2. And that's basically to stop someone from only taking the anthropology courses.
Well, they couldn't, practically speaking, anyway, because we can't field all of them, right? Like a lot of them are
Right,
archaeology
but over
courses.
4 years,
And even
they-
then, I would be skeptical they could take more than 2, honestly. just
Right.
Because our staffing is such that I don't think it's going to be an issue. And also, I should point out that one of the major sustainability schools that was founded in this country is ASU, and they are all biology and archaeology,
right,
because the archaeology is where the data is.
right,
Right? If you look at just the past 400 years, you're not looking at massive climate change or sustainable societies or urbanism even. All those questions are archaeology. So like, that's where, I mean, that's what they decided at ASU anyway, and they attracted millions of dollars to build their long-term environmental study networks, which mostly are populated by biologists, ecologists, and
hmm
conservationists and archaeologists.
right.
So
It
that's
does,
not that
yeah.
weird, honestly.
Yeah,
But
But I
would
mean,
put
it's
that in
also, so like one of the other courses we have is Eco 330, which is economic development, which like Glenn Graham pointed out, when he teaches the course, it really is not sustainability. When David Andrews teaches the course, it is. So that, is sort of a problem. The next problem that was brought up, or question that was brought up, is it a problem that we don't have a lot of 400 level courses? And I mean, I would say no, just based on the programs that I'm involved in, like in the social sciences, there's not really, aside from psychology, there's not a huge difference between a 300 level and a 400 level, except for the capstone, right? Psychology has like, I'm going to make up the number, like 350 and 450, and one feeds right into the other. But and I think in the sciences that happens a lot, like there's intro to ecology is 320, and I know that there's a 420, but in these aren't like that. So I know it certainly won't be a problem for, it might theoretically, like ethically or philosophically be a problem, but it's not a problem for getting it through governance, because I know other programs that don't have. And then the last one, and I actually have not met this faculty member yet, but someone who's, I think, new in geology, had worked in sustainability, and basically said, like, the broadness actually made sense, but he really recommended that we have a communication class, because that is, you know, a really important component of, like, that a lot of what people who work in sustainability end up doing is like having to talk to other people and convince them or explain to them what's going on and all of that. So I'm going to talk with Com about it. I don't know if we want to do just a generic course, or if we want to have it be like a, you know, I know there's like science journalism course, you know what I mean? Like there are specific ways to teach people to talk about complicated subjects to broader audiences. It'd be great if they wanted to create that course, but I don't know where they are in terms of their staffing and all that kind of stuff, if they could do that.
I mean, yeah. I'm not as worried about the 400 level courses as I am about the data courses. And like, we don't really have, if you're talking about sustainable management or anything like that, we don't have anything about leads or buildings, or, you know what I mean? Like, we don't have to, but. it's
Right.
just-
Well, I
The
think
only environmental planning course I see there is archaeology, which is sad. 'Cause
Right.
There's a lot more
I mean-
environmental planning than us, and we're the only ones. Who take that class.
ironically, the history course, the America's Urban History, is actually sustainable. Like we counted for sustainability because a lot of it is about urban planning.
Yeah.
I know that I think there are people on campus who are interested in that kind of stuff, but yeah, we don't currently have. I mean, I don't know, John, what do you think? We could probably. How closely are you all involved with the LEED certification that?
I mean, from what I understand, New York as a whole is trying to not follow lead and go to a different,
Oh,
more comprehensive. I think
okay.
That's just from what we've heard from Jimmy, and that we're not really adhering to lead like formally, but because now, I mean, Hewitt is not meeting lead standards really, but we're still following those lead protocols, even though we're not actually
Like gonna apply for the
getting- yeah, we're not
certification?
gonna get certification for it, but contractors are still being held to those standards until we adopt a new.
So is New York State working on that kind of cert, like California has, or are we? Is New York State working on that kind of a certification program? I know California has their own, but.
I have no idea about that.
Oh.
I don't know. I'm not sure what they're doing with that. That's just all I know about lead. We're going about it on campus.
Right. So in technology, in technology or technology management program, they have courses in like construction management and in, actually, was it there? Or did I have a student transfer in a course about green building design? He may have transferred in that course. But yeah, so these, like, they're out there. Brings me to a bigger problem, not a bigger problem, but with this major, like I cannot run it. Like, or at least I can't do it if I'm still doing global studies. Like this really needs a full-time person to run the major and the minor. Like, it's great that we have I think we currently have 56 sustainability minors, but I'm the advisor for all of them.
It's not
And
sustainable.
all right, it's not sustainable.
Sorry.
But I
It's
mean,
bad, I know, sorry.
yeah, I mean, and I think one of the challenges with interdisciplinary programs is they're sort of like off in their own, like sometimes in IPAC and sometimes not, but like, you know, the IPAC secretary is retiring in a month.
Oh.
And I'm the IPAC director. And so I can't do both. And so like, I really do think we're going to need, like when this hits priorities and planning, it's they I think would be completely legitimate to bring up, like I think there's going to be demand for this right away. And I think we need to hire people to support this program.
Didn't it just hire biologists?
Yes, I voiced my concern about that. That the sustainability person went to biology. But yeah, maybe we can get more. And maybe it'll be a failed search. And if it is, I'm totally gonna advocate to get them to be in a different place. But it won't be a failed search because this is the thing, like there's so much demand for the major and for people graduating from this major and it looks different in a lot of different places. So I want like to be able to train our students to be able to like deal with, like know how to ask the right questions and to have like enough technical skills that they can move forward, but also critical thinking skills that they could figure stuff out on their own. What do you got, Zach?
All right. I guess one general question is, what were some of the other programs that were looked at, you know, as this is being created, were there any models, were there any influences about how this was created, or is this kind of more of like, just this is what the minor is and we're expanding it this way? Like, you know, was there something that kind of helped to drive what this looks like?
It was a little of both. So it was, a lot of it was, this is what we have. And so this is what we could, what we think we could do pretty easily. We did also have, so John, I don't remember exactly, it was like probably a year and a half ago, we had that meeting in the sustainability office. And so we had some students who were, we actually had a student who was working on this, but they went and looked at other programs. So Cortland, like ESF, like who our competitors would be. But we looked at some other programs too, like in other states. I mean, and some are like, you know, like Middlebury, but we can't even compare to, you know, we just, it's not gonna, we can't compete to something with that highly of a resourced program. So we did look at other programs, and the question that we came up with at the end of that meeting was like, we need to be able to say like, what is it that makes our program unique? I think right now, actually, what makes our program unique is, number one, it truly is interdisciplinary, but also like those data courses, if we could get them up and running, are different from what a lot of other places have.
I guess it depends on what people are doing with them is the issue, right?
With
And-
the different degrees, you mean?
Yeah. I was just gonna look up the ASU, yeah, I mean, ASU's actually put their sustainability degree online. And they have a ton of, and they have a BS. So, this is sort of structured as a BA, right? But you have a science core. So you're kind of like, we just don't have the staffing, I don't think, I mean, to run it as a BA and a BS, the way it's done in some of the other major research universities, right? Because they have people who are more the sciencey versus more the social science, right? And those have kind of, I mean, I guess related, but kind of separated hiring tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of local internships with water management department, et cetera. I mean, here, I guess we've got the port, but,
Yeah, well, and you know, we've had students who, this is going back, but who interned with like Oswego County when they went to single stream recycling. We actually had a student who interned. This was before we had a sustainability office. We had a student who interned with like the Office of Waste Management, which is not a thing, but that equivalent in Oswego County, who actually helped do the education campaign to like, these are the differences between, and this is what it means. I got contacted by Buffalo, was looking for a recycling coordinator. I mean, it was like a good paying job. It was like $60,000 to start. And they didn't have anyone applying. And part of it is because they wanted experience in the field. But if we had a practicum and like some of our service learning course experience and some of our coursework or even interning in the system would count as a practicum. Right. So like there are, like, I don't think anyone is going to graduate from this and say, I'm going to be an environmental engineer. Right. Like if they want to do that, they're going to have to go to an MS program or like, that's not really, but I think this is for the broader, like working for a company, working in a sustainable, like we've actually had one of our first graduates was a sustainability officer at a different college. And then he was working for SUNY. And I think now he's working for the state of New York. Like, yeah, Alex Likens. So he was like, others, like our first two students who graduated, who didn't officially have it, but who we gave them a certificate because they finished the minor, but we didn't have it approved yet. One went on to practice environmental law and the other one worked like for nonprofits. So like, I mean, I think that's kind of more what we're not technical enough to be. And for that, they could be this. The reason why I like having it at 39 credits is that they could be a double major. Like, so they could be like the geology has an environmental science track, or I think it's a major now actually, right? Like, so you could do that. You could be a technology management major. Like you could have one of those more specific and have a little bit of double dipping, but
I see an archaeologist getting a double major in this pretty easily, and some of the core courses on methods, et cetera, would be very useful just for getting the jobs.
yeah, actually I gotta write down that methods thing because that was a good. And maybe that will prompt us to actually get our social science methods thing
Well,
off
yeah,
the
because what
ground.
we're realizing in a lot of our majors, I'm sure, is that we can't field subdisciplinary specific methods courses dealing with actual data very easily. It's sort of embedded in the methods course, really can't be that class. Right? Because like you're talking about the problems of sampling, research design, that has to be a different course than where
Right.
we talk about how we actually handle data. And I think it would be, if we did that among our departments, we could actually field that class and then put our majors in our method specific analysis classes, which would make more sense. Like, I think it would solve a lot.
Yeah, I think it would too.
So one thing that I would hope somehow appears in this as well, whether it's in technology or within the classroom themselves, would be more than discussions, honestly, about open access. And because it is something that is in the STARS report. And this understanding that open access to data, to information is also part of sustainability and being able to provide information to people without barriers. And that is part of sustainability. That is one of those core components to it. And that being able to understand the issues that surround open access and why it's important in a global sense is, I think, also something that should be considered, whether it's in technology, whether it's in the classroom, wherever it is. So that would be my getting up on my soapbox and talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would come up in a research methods course, but I think it would come up in the database, like, because normally, I shouldn't say normally, but
I wrote a
what,
manual. It's for free on Academia, and I'm actually planning on turning it into an OER textbook. And I would use it for that class.
yeah,
Since I've been giving it away for free already, I would make it a better book and then give it away for free more formally. But
Yeah, it would be, I would hope that as part of this, that the students that are involved in this would have at least an opportunity to understand that is, a part of sustainability as well. And it be not something that is necessarily buried in the understanding of what this is, but also that it's an opportunity for them to understand what this is and see it as not a highlight, but something that is visible.
yeah, one of the things with that GIS class, so like I learned ArcGIS, or I learned on ArcGIS. When I do a little bit of GIS in some of my classes, but like SUNY Excel has, not SUNY Excel, oh my God, Microsoft Excel has like some, even Google Sheets now has some like baby GIS stuff you can do with data. And so I have them do projects just using Excel. But QGIS or QGIS is the actual open source. I'm just like, damn it, now I'm gonna have to go learn that because that's the one I would rather do than having us get like all these licenses for ArcGIS, which is gonna be a lot of money.
so much programming to learn to use that thing though.
I know.
That's really why I haven't been using, I mean, like, it's just the GIS programs in general. It's just so, it's like R being the better statistical thing. Forcing when you teach a class in R, basically, because I've designed one, but I've yet to teach it. Because the investment in teaching people how to create their own program rather than using the canned ones, it's just really hard. That's the only bummer. That's the only bummer.
But I love the idea of like, if those SUS 200 courses could like cascade into each other
Yeah.
of like,
That'd be
you
awesome.
know, right, I mean, so that like you database management
Yep.
and then you come to GIS and you have your data, right? And then you can be like, this is, and you know,
Map it.
right, and now we can map it. So like, it would be nice if it would cascade into each other.
And for clarification as well, it wouldn't be just open access to data, but also to research. Because that's really another, like, that's where I fall out more into the data part. I mean, I'm just gonna say we're kind of terrible at it. But also with, at least with the research part of being understanding about how to actually share your research in an open access way is very different than just, you know, putting it up on a website, because there are issues that go along with how that is all handled as well. So it's something to consider, but both data management and open access to research are, I believe, concerns for sustainability, especially on a global, worldwide level. So.
Good. Any other comments, concerns?
Hey, Lisa,
Yep.
okay, I guess I had a couple questions. One was, have you considered having any additional required classes? Like I was in a similar major to this at Cornell, and we had just like some, you know, it was very broad and we had a lot of choice in different tracks, which was great. But there were more requirements. For instance, you're required to take an environmental ethics course. You're required to take an environmental economics course to make sure that despite the broadness, people were hitting this like whatever basic core, obviously you decide you need. So I was just wondering if you'd considered adding anything else to the core list.
Yeah, so we haven't. We haven't. Actually, Cornell was another one of the schools that we looked at, which, you know. But so I'll tell you the reason why we haven't is because mostly it's related to how often we teach these courses, right? So environmental economics, I think, is taught once every 2 years. And I think most of us are on the schedule of, or on the rotation of teaching something once every 2 years, which it's really hard to make something a core if we're not teaching it every semester. So that's the challenge with that. Although I get the point of having a more prescribed kind of program, you know, to make sure that students are getting that. I mean, the environmental ethics one is one of the things that we have struggled with from the beginning is there are very few humanities in our minor. And it's like occasionally we'll get like a one-off, you know, there's a Cinnamon Screen Studies professor who will teach a course on like filmmaking and on like sustainability issues. Like, we had someone, actually that same person would teach English 102. She would have a sustainability focus, but we don't really have, I mean, I think environmental ethics would be wonderful to have, but it hasn't been offered in years is the problem. So, and I don't know, I mean, if we have maybe like a wish list or if that department knew that we would, you know, you'd have people in the class would fill, you know what I mean? Like if they could teach it more often, but I think those are the issues there, but I'm going to write that down because I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it would even need to be a ton, and especially like, obviously this is the starting point, and we may not have all the faculty or the consistency of the courses offered, but I suppose like looking 5-10 years out, like, are there this like list of courses that you would really want every sustainability major to take ideally, you know? And I guess I had another question about, you know, I think, you know, I found this to be very interesting. Are there any courses in the business school or elsewhere that are about sort of like negotiating among multiple stakeholders and kind of like you know, we read this book called Getting to Yes. Like, how do you not just compromise, but like have discussions and manage projects when multiple stakeholders are involved and you need everybody to be involved to move forward? Seems like that's something that would be relevant for these students after graduation.
The CRM course, we do that multiple times. We have consultation practice with multiple stakeholders and examples of failures and success stories. Like Apple being the big failure, but a ton of pipelines got agreed upon in the US because they followed consultation, you know, and talked to actual stakeholders and made compromises. And we actually do that in class because it's part of environmental planning. So
What is that 3:30? No.
it's 337 and 337. That's like a huge part of that class.
Yeah, well, that maybe could be something that is in the communication course too. So the School of Business, there's a challenge that we have with the School of Business is because they're what is it, AASB approved, they cannot make deviations to prerequisites. They can't, like, they are really very, very strict about who can access their courses. So I think this is an important idea, but I think if we do it, it's going to have to be a course that is open to non-majors, which also none of their courses are currently. Like, it would have to be a course that would be open and would have that would not have like management 261 as the prerequisite, which they put on all of their courses as the prerequisite. Like, it would have to be just so that a student could actually get through the program. But yeah, I mean, that's something that probably a lot of us could teach, right? Like, I mean, we're all coming from different fields, but like the kinds of, like, this happens in public policy, it happens in CRM, it happens in communication, you know what I mean? Like, I think we could probably create a course that maybe would get to some of that. But the other consensus building, I think you said. Okay. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, and could you just like slowly scroll through the courses again? I just missed that the first time.
Sure. So I'm gonna just pause John for a second because I have Math 158 and Math 179 because we get a lot of students who start out as bio majors who then ditch bio, and their Math Gen Ed is 179. And so I want to make sure we capture, because it's basically statistics. It's just like using bio examples. So that's why I have that there, although I think it would be more of an advising recommendation.
Math teaches that class though, right?
Math teaches it, yeah. But it's only for bio majors. Like, you have to be a bio major to be in it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's not true. They might, oh, wait, no. Yeah, only bio majors. It's a different one for education. So in a lot of these other courses, I'm sorry, John, if you can scroll up for a second, like, so Kristen, I know bio has a whole curriculum committee. Bio is another department who, except for Bio 363, which is a gen ed course, all of their courses are major, minor restricted.
Mhm.
Eric Helquist has been really good at giving instructor permission for sustainability majors to be in Intro to Ecology. Ecosystems and Society requires 12 bio credits, which effectively makes it major, minor restriction because you can't
Yeah.
get, like, there aren't enough bio credits you could take without being a major and have 12 credits. So a lot of this is going to be talking with departments to see if we could get them to kind of change the way, like, so for example, Earth's resources, oh, well, they have, yeah, so, you know, Geo 150, like, so for some of them, it's like, could you count one of our courses also as your, like a potential prerequisite?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be a great movement to take. And I mean, obviously I know bio most, but there's plenty of faculty with global change interests, and it would be a shame to not be able to add more of those courses to this and open those up for sustainability majors. And I'll just throw this out there that I've had conversations with Eric Helquist about starting to co-teach climate change or global change bio again, which is on the books but has never been taught, because I would love to see something like that as an option for sustainability majors.
Yeah, actually, it's funny, it's still, I think it might be on bio's books, but it's not even in the catalog anymore because I guess but it officially has that number. The same thing with that Human Futures, the astronomy course, like when I first started this, that course was on the books. And then when I went to double check everything, it's like, oh God, it's been so long that course is gone. So I have no idea if they're gonna do that again. So I think, I mean, so for John and with teaching the project management and for Kate's carbon accounting class, it's a little bit different for you both because you're like, whether you want that to be 1 credit or 2 credit or 3 credits, it's like, it's different because it would be extra service for you regardless, I think. And it really then would just depend on like, how much time in seats do you need, you know what I mean? Like, would you want for this? So we can maybe play around with when we create those courses with what the number of credits is going to be. So if you look at like the political science courses that are listed, so like one of the things that I did for the courses that I teach is with my department approval, I went in and now like if a student wants to take any of those political science courses there, they can take either any 3 POL credits or they could take our intro sustainability or the global studies intro course, right? So that, and the whole point of that is that it's one less email I get from a student saying, I really want to take this, but I can't get into it, right? So it's like having more pathways to the upper division courses, which should make our lives easier. And then there are some hidden prerequisites, which those I have bracketed. And this is something that APC, the Academic Policies Council, is really going to pay attention to. So SOCH 100, the Economics 101 and 200, right? Like those are all prerequisites that like I know David and Glenn will waive those for the economic students if they know they've taken the economic foundations of sustainability, like they'll waive those, but it's just more bureaucratic work if we have to do that. So, and hidden prerequisites like effectively increase the size of your major. So, and APC does not like them at all for good reason. But we also don't want to have too many lower division courses. Or we would have to, in each of the tiers, set like in global studies, our concentration areas are like, let's say 18 credits, but 15 of the credits have to be upper division. Right, so like that's because you don't want a student just getting through with like intro courses and never actually going deeper into anything. So I don't know if people have thoughts about that.
There's just no other way to do it without having a separate department. And since this is never how these kind of majors are structured, we're just stuck with haphazardly dealing with.
Right.
I mean, yeah, so, I mean, I think that's a reasonable plan.
I mean, the way to do it is also a messy way, which is to create SUS corollaries
Yeah,
for like SUS 367 globalization and poverty. And then the requirement for that is SUS 115.
but
But it makes it so messy when you're listing the core, like it's really messy. To get students registered and make sure your caps don't go over, like it's cross listing is not ideal. So I mean, and that could be a conversation with SOCH, right? Like actually, and I need to have that conversation with SOCH because a lot of my global studies students take globalization and poverty. So like GLS 200 should be another pathway to it, right? And Eve has said like the global studies students do really well in that class because they've had some of the,
it's not hard
so.
to change prereqs. It's just a bureaucratic step.
Right, yeah, and it's just trying to get, so it's like a lot of, I mean, this is why it's taken a year. Like, I mean, ostensibly I was on sabbatical last spring, but it's, yeah, it's a lot of. And this isn't even, like, this is just getting it right for us. All the paperwork that has to go to SUNY, you have to show how someone, like in 8 semesters, how would they graduate with this and complete gen ed and get enough liberal arts credits? And how would someone who transfers in with 60 credits get enough liberal arts credits and, finish their gen ed and graduate? So it's like a bunch of like tables and data management that you have to send to SUNY as
Sounds
well,
like a program.
and state ed. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so, and I think this probably is not gonna hit the books until fall of 25 by the time because I think if we can get our departmental stuff, like if we can get like this year, get like all the prerequisite issues, get like the course issues, the rest of this semester, get that worked out. And then start in, fall 24. Because it's fall 23 is what the next semester is. So, and then it would take us like 23 to 24 to get through state ed and SUNY, and then it would hopefully be on the books for fall of 24 enrollment with some lines attached to it, ideally. And that line could be in another department, right? Like if we hire, well, I always ask for a geographer for global studies, and geographers are like so interdisciplinary, but like, I don't care what department, like they could be in ANT, they can be in SOCH, they could be housed in another department, but their primary responsibility would be to this. We'll see how that goes.
I have an idea
Okay.
about that, actually. You wanna-
Oh yeah, we're out over time. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the feedback. And you guys email me if you have any other concerns or thoughts on it. And I can share this document with people too. It is shared with, oh no, because I copied it over. Yeah, let me know if you want the link and I can send it to you. Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.